That day, I understood, without anyone having to explain it to me, that for my own family, I was no longer important. I will never forget Emily's icy smile when I asked her with the excitement of a proud father when the grand opening of my son's bar would be. She barely looked up from her wineglass, looked at me like someone looks at an old piece of furniture, and answered without hesitation, "We celebrated yesterday just for special people." I felt those words go through me like a slow knife twisting with contempt. I, who had spent sleepless nights calculating budgets, asking for loans, selling memories so that bar could exist, was not a special person. In that instant, I knew something was deeply broken. Michael was by her side in silence. He did not contradict her. He did not lower his head in shame. He simply pretended to check his phone as if I had not just received the biggest humiliation of my life. I remained standing with the question still suspended in the air, feeling like a stranger at the table where for years I paid for the food, the electricity, the roof. I had dreamed of that bar like someone who dreams of leaving a worthy inheritance. I had imagined toasts, hugs, a family photo framed on the wall, but for them I was just a walking check. I did not argue, I did not cry. I smiled with a dignity I learned through loss, and said goodbye with a steady voice. That night I walked back to my house slowly with a shrinking heart. I thought about all the times my son as a young man promised me that this business would get us ahead. I thought of his enthusiasm, his hugs, his faith, and I also thought for the first time that perhaps I had raised a stranger. But before continuing, I would like to know if you subscribed to the channel William's Revenge Stories, and if you liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now, let's continue. A week later, when I was still trying to rebuild myself from that exclusion, my phone rang. It was Emily. This time her voice held no contempt, but urgency. "The bills are late. Did you make the transfer?" she demanded without a greeting. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and answered calmly, "Didn't I tell you?" There was a thick silence on the other end of the line. I knew perfectly well that I hadn't said anything, but for the first time in many years, something inside me refused to obey without thinking. That night, I barely slept. I sat at my small desk and reviewed all the receipts of the deposits I had made during the last 2 years. Each figure hit me like a slap in the face. Remodeling the place, licenses, furniture, machinery, advertising, merchandise. I had paid for almost everything. My pension, my life insurance, the savings of 3 decades of work had evaporated into that bar I was not even invited to inaugurate. I remembered perfectly the day Michael came to ask me for help. He was nervous with sweaty hands. He spoke to me of dreams, of opportunities, of independence. "Dad, this business will change our lives," he told me. I hugged him with emotion. I never thought about contracts. I never demanded legal participation. I trusted as only a father trusts. Since he married her, everything changed. Emily was always elegant, cold, calculating. At first, she was attentive to me. She talked to me about projects. She thanked me for the support. Over time, the thanks turned into demands, and my son, getting weaker and weaker, began to repeat her words like an echo. After that call, I decided to go to the bar without warning. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I put on a simple shirt, took the bus, and arrived at the place in the late afternoon. From the sidewalk, I saw lights on people, laughing, loud music. The bar was full packed, and yet they said the bills were late. I went in. No one recognized me at first. I sat at a table in the back and ordered a drink. I observed every detail, the new furniture I had paid for, the gleaming bar I had financed, even the glasses engraved with the name of the bar that I had ordered made. Everything I saw was mine, and at the same time, it did not belong to me. Michael appeared behind the bar. When he saw me, his face jumped for a second before composing itself. He approached with a forced smile. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't know you had already opened either," I replied in a low voice. He looked down. It was something improvised, just for special people, I shot back. He didn't answer. I looked around and felt a bitter mixture of pride and rage. The business was working, and yet my pension was still being requested, as if everything were in ruins. I returned home with a knot in my stomach. That night, I checked my accounts again. I discovered larger transfers than usual made with urgency, always at the same time. I remembered then something that had worried me weeks ago. Emily had a copy of my card in case something happened. I, naive, had accepted. The next morning I went to the bank. I asked for complete statements. I asked for detailed movements. I asked for advice. The young woman at the counter looked at me with some compassion when I told her my age. She printed everything for me, and there I saw it clearly. I was not just paying bar expenses, I was also paying credit cards that were not mine. Dinners, trips, clothes, hotels. I felt the floor sinking beneath my feet. That afternoon, Michael called me again. "Dad, Mom, Linda isn't feeling well," he said, "and also we really need that transfer." Linda, my wife, had died 7 years ago. "Do not use her name to demand money from me," I replied coldly. There was silence on the other end. "Dad," he said with a tone that tried to sound affectionate, "you know it's always been hard for us." It was also hard for me when no one celebrated my old age or my fatigue or my sacrifices, I replied. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night I understood something painful. I was no longer a father. I was a resource, and resources, when they run out, are discarded. But I also understood something else. I still had something they couldn't take away so easily, my dignity. And that dignity, although wounded, still had a voice. That night I could barely sleep. Every number I had seen on the bank statements kept dancing in front of my eyes like a silent mockery. It wasn't just the bar money, it was my entire life summarized in figures that others were using as if they meant nothing. I got up before dawn, made coffee, and sat staring at the wall in silence like someone waiting for a confession that never comes. I remembered with painful clarity the first deposit I made to help my son. It was a modest amount, just to cover the first month of rent for the place. He promised me it would be temporary, that as soon as the business walked on its own, he would pay me back every dollar. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't ask for a contract. I believed him because he was my son, because as a child he ran to me when he was scared, because as a young man he spoke to me of his dreams with shining eyes. Then came the remodeling. "Dad, if we do it right from the beginning, we won't have to spend twice," he told me. We paid for new walls, electricity, plumbing, painting. Then came the furniture, table, chairs, display cases. I signed checks with a strange mixture of pride and concern. I told myself I was investing in his future, in something that one day would also be mine, although it never appeared on any paper. Over time, Emily began to take charge of the accounts. "It's to organize better," she said. I nodded. She asked me for transfers more and more frequently. There was always an urgency, a supplier who couldn't wait, an unexpected bill, a delay, that had to be resolved before everything came crashing down. And I, like a trusting fool, always responded. That morning I made a different decision. I went to the bank again. I asked to speak with an advisor. I explained with shame that I needed to understand where my money was going. The young man listened to me with respect. He showed me charts, outflows, inflows. He spoke to me of movements that did not correspond to a small business of personal expenses, disguised as business purchases of withdrawals at strange hours. "Did you authorize these payments?" he asked me. I shook my head. "Then does anyone else have access to your account?" He said seriously, "and not just access control." I felt a chill run down my spine. I returned home with the certainty that this was no longer just an emotional humiliation. It was financial abuse by every rule. I sat in the armchair and held in my hands an old photograph of Michael from when he was just 5 years old, and smiled toothlessly in front of his birthday cake. I looked at it for a long time, trying to recognize in that child the man who now allowed my account to be emptied with the same coldness with which a debt is collected. Hours later, the phone rang again. "Dad!" Michael said with a tense voice. "Emily's mom is sick. We need to cover some urgent medical expenses. It's just for this time." Emily, my daughter-in-law, her mother, had never mentioned economic problems to me, but now everything was justified in the name of invisible emergencies. "How much?" I asked, with a knot in my stomach. "The usual," he replied. "Whatever you can." I hung up without answering. I sat for a long time. I felt something new grow inside me, a mixture of pain, disappointment, and contained rage. I was no longer just a father helping, I was a man being used. I decided to call an old friend, a retired accountant. I asked him to review my movements calmly without anyone else knowing. He accepted without question. That same afternoon, he showed up at my house with glasses on the tip of his nose and a folder under his arm. "This isn't family support," he stated after an hour of review. "This is bleeding you dry." He'd pointed to several movements marked in red. "Look at this purchases of designer clothes, luxury restaurants, hotels all charged as operating expenses. And this," he said, lowering his voice, "are transfers to an account that belongs to neither your son nor his business." I felt like I was missing air. "Who does it belong to?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know yet, but I can find out." I nodded, and in that nod, I knew there was no turning back. That night, while I was eating dinner alone, Michael came without warning. He entered nervously, looking everywhere. "Dad," he said, "Emily is very upset. She says you are taking too long with the money." "I'm not a bank," I replied calmly, "but you always helped us." "Helping is not the same as sustaining a lie," I said. He remained silent for a few seconds. "Do you distrust us?" "I distrust what you do," I replied, "not what you say." He lowered his head. "Dad, I don't handle the accounts. Emily sees everything." "That is precisely the problem," I said. He sat across from me, exhausted. "She knew how to move better in those subjects." "I just wanted to open the bar. And I just wanted to see you happy," I replied bitterly. Not turned into the friendly face of a scam. He looked up suddenly. "Scam." I didn't answer him. The silence said it all. He got up suddenly restless. "I'll talk to her," he said. "This will be cleared up." I watched him leave, not knowing whether to believe him or pity him. I could no longer distinguish in him if he was an accomplice or simply a coward. 2 days later, my accountant friend returned with news. The account where part of my transfers were going was in the name of a third party, a man listed as an investor partner in the bar. A name I had never heard. I felt a sharp blow to my chest. There was a partner, and I wasn't him. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't complain. I simply sat in front of the mirror and looked at myself as I hadn't done in years. I saw a 62-year-old man with deep circles under his eyes with tired hands, with a back loaded with sacrifices, but I also saw someone who, for the first time in a long time, was beginning to wake up. I was no longer the father blind with love. Now I was a man beginning to understand how far they had pushed him, and when one understands that something inside hardens. The idea that there was a hidden partner haunted me all night like a shadow attached to my steps. I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house in silence, observing objects I had bought for years for my son, an old watch that belonged to my father, a toy crane he liked so much as a child, even the old desk where he did his homework. Everything now seemed part of an inheritance given to those who did not know how to honor it. The next morning I received a message from Emily. "The bills are still late. The supplier threatens to cut off the supply. We need the money today." There was no greeting. There was no please. Just an order. I read the message several times without answering. For the first time in a long time, I felt no urgency to help, but a strange calm, as if something inside me had understood that fear should no longer govern my decisions. I decided to go back to the bar this time with different eyes. I went in the middle of the afternoon when the place wasn't full. I sat in the back, again ordered a coffee and watched. 2 employees were talking behind the bar. One of them mentioned something that caught my attention. The new partner arrives today to see the numbers. I raised my head immediately, pretending interest in the TV. A new partner, not the same one the accountant had spoken of. How many more were there in this story? Michael appeared shortly after. He looked at me with surprise, but tried to hide it. Dad here again. I just came to see how everything was going, I replied. He hesitated a second before nodding. It's going well, better than we expected. Then I don't understand why funds are always missing, I said softly. He lowered his gaze. Expenses went up. Emily handles those things better. That phrase no longer reassured me. It confirmed that he had completely given up his own control. I left the bar without arguing. A few blocks away, the mental count of each of my transfers weighed like a slab on my shoulders. That night, my accountant friend called me before I could look for him. I found more irregularities, he told me. The account receiving your money belongs to a certain Stephen Reynolds. He is listed as an investor partner in 2 other gastronomic businesses, both closed with debts. I felt my heart shrink. Does Michael know? I asked. That is what I cannot assure you, he replied. But if he doesn't know, it's because he doesn't want to know. I hung up with cold hands. I began to understand that the money was not just being lost. It was being funneled in a calculated way. That same night, Emily called me again. This time her voice wasn't demanding, but falsely sweet. I just wanted to know if everything was okay with you, she said. Your son is worried. I'm fine, I replied. Just observing. Observing what, Robert? She asked with a soft laugh that didn't fool me. How do you spend money that doesn't entirely belong to you? Her voice hardened immediately. The money was already invested. You cannot claim it now. I can claim whenever I consider it necessary, I replied, because it never stopped being mine. There was a thick silence on the other end of the line. It doesn't suit you to start with reproaches, she said finally. You could lose the little you have left. That veiled threat fell like thunder inside me. I have lost quite a bit more than you think, I replied, but I still have something you cannot touch. I hung up without giving her time to answer. That conversation confirmed what my intuition already knew. The demand for money was no longer a necessity. It was a routine of power. They took for granted that I would keep paying with or without questions, with or without respect. The next day, I received a notification from the bank. An automatic transfer had been attempted without my authorization and had been rejected for lack of funds. That transfer was destined for Stephen Reynolds' account. I hadn't programmed it. Someone else had access. With the paper in my hand, I felt for the first time a cold, different fear. I was no longer just a betrayed father. I was a man they were trying to empty completely. I went straight to the bank. I spoke with a supervisor. I explained the situation. They helped me block non-face-to-face transfers change, passwords, set up alerts. While I signed the new security controls, my hands were shaking. Not from weakness, but from the certainty that the war had ceased to be silent. When I returned home, I found 5 missed calls from Michael. I called him back. Dad, what did you do with the bank? He asked, upset, as soon as he picked up. I protected myself, I replied. Emily is furious. She says you blocked the system. I didn't block anything, I said. I only recovered what I should never have lost control of my own money. But now we can't pay the suppliers, he insisted. You should have thought about that before letting others decide for you. He was silent for a few seconds. Dad, Stephen is here right now. We need to resolve this. Stephen is the partner, right? I asked. His breathing hitched. How do you know? I learned to ask in the right places. He didn't answer. Listen to me well, I added. From today on, I will not send a single cent more until you show me real balances contracts and the exact destination of every dollar I put there. That is impossible right now, he said with a tense voice. Then you will have to learn to sustain your own business, I replied. Like any adult. I hung up without saying goodbye. That afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt for years, a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the distance that was definitely opening between my son and me. Relief, because for the first time I wasn't responding from fear. At dusk, I checked my papers again. I ordered every receipt, every deposit, every date. I realized then something even more painful. I hadn't been an investor. I had been an ATM with a father's face. And ATMs, when they empty, are discarded. But that night, I took a definitive decision. I wouldn't do it again. I was going to discover down to the last cent. I was going to know who Stephen Reynolds really was. I was going to understand why my money was never enough when the bar was always full. And above all, I was going to confront my own son with a truth he was perhaps not prepared to hear. Because that business was no longer just a bar. It was the stage where the bitterest betrayal of my life was being exhibited. The name Stephen Reynolds didn't stop echoing in my head since the day my son mentioned it inadvertently. Until that moment, that partner was nothing more than a shadow between numbers and transfers. But now he had a name, a real presence, a face I didn't know yet, and that undoubtedly was linked to the silent disappearance of my savings. I decided not to confront immediately. I learned in too many years of work and family that he who rushes loses. I needed information, not arguments. So I started with the only thing I could still control without them knowing my own movements. For several days I feigned normality. I answered Michael's messages with brief and evasive replies. I ignored Emily's demands. Meanwhile, I left home early and walked around the bar, observing without being seen. The hours of highest income, the number of customers, the suppliers, coming and going. Everything indicated that the business was not only far from ruin, it was prospering. Then why was money never enough? One afternoon, I saw a black car park in front of the place. A middle-aged man got out, well-dressed, with the air of someone who knows he is used to commanding. He entered without greeting anyone straight to the bar area, where Michael received him with evident nervousness. I had no doubts. That was Stephen. I waited a few minutes and then entered calmly. I sat at a side table. I ordered a coffee. I observed. Stephen spoke in a low voice, but gestured impatiently. Michael nodded to everything like a scolded boy. Emily appeared shortly after. She smiled in a way she had never smiled in front of me. It was a smile of submission and complicity. That broke my heart. While I pretended to read the menu, I heard loose phrases, balances, accounts, suppliers, the father's transfer. My stomach turned. There was no doubt anymore. I wasn't just financing the bar. I was financing something I didn't even completely understand. I left the place without them seeing me. That night I called the accountant again. I asked him for something more delicate, investigating Stephen Reynolds. That takes time, he warned me, and it isn't cheap. Nothing has been cheap for me lately, I replied bitterly. 2 days later, he came back with news that weighed more than any figure. Stephen is not just an investor, he told me. He is linked to several places that opened with great cash flow and closed leaving million-dollar debts. In all cases, the pattern is the same. A third party puts up the initial capital, and when money runs out, the business falls. But the partner has already retired with his profits. I felt a cold run down my spine. And my son, I won't even ask what role he plays there. The accountant sighed. For now, he is listed as operations administrator. The legal figure is Emily. Stephen appears barely as an external financial advisor, very convenient. I rested my elbows on the table and covered my face with my hands. Everything was designed so that I would never appear on any paper, so that when the day came, no one could say that money had been mine. That night, Emily called me again. She was no longer demanding, she was aggressive. "What are you trying to do?" she shouted as soon as I answered. "Open my eyes," I replied calmly. "You're going to ruin us," she said. "Are you playing with fire?" "I'm not playing," I replied. "I'm tired of being set on fire." There was a loaded silence. "Stephen is not someone you want to mess with," she said finally. That's when I understood everything. "Then it is true," I replied. "You didn't create just a bar, you created something much dirtier at my expense." She hung up immediately. That call confirmed that I was no longer facing a domestic betrayal. I was facing a structure designed to empty me little by little. That early morning, I almost didn't sleep. I thought about every detail of the past, every time I trusted without asking, every time I thought helping was loving, and I also thought with pain about how easy it had been for my son to look the other way. The next morning, I made another decision. I called a lawyer specializing in financial fraud. I didn't give him full names, not yet. I just explained the pattern. He listened in silence and then said a phrase that shook me. "You are not the first person this has been done to, but you may be one of the few to stop it in time." We made an appointment for the next day. That afternoon, Michael came to see me. He entered without knocking. His face was discomposed. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk." "For a long time," I replied, "but you never listened to me." He sat across from me. For the first time, he didn't seem arrogant. He seemed scared. "Stephen says that if the money doesn't come in, everything goes down." "And does it seem normal to you that a business that is always full depends on the money of a retiree?" Ido asked him. He lowered his head. "I don't understand numbers." "Do you understand conscience?" I replied. "And on that one you are also falling short." He passed a hand over his face. "Emily told me you would always help." "Helping is not letting yourself be looted," I said, "and you allowed it." He looked up with wet eyes. "I just wanted it to work, Dad. I wanted to show you I could." "And you ended up showing that you could use me like a tool," I replied with sadness, "without asking yourself how much it cost me." He kept silent for a long time. "Stephen told me you didn't matter," he murmured, "that you were already old, that your money slept in the bank?" I felt a deep stab in my chest. "And did that seem right to you?" I didn't know what to think. "Thinking was the only thing you had to do," I told him. He got up slowly. "If this explodes, we all sink," he said. "No, son," I replied firmly. "If it explodes, those who set off the bomb sink. I was just walking on it without knowing." He left without saying goodbye. That same night, I received a message from an unknown number. "Stop investigating. You do not understand what you are getting into." I had no doubts. It was Stephen. I looked at the screen without answering. For the first time, I felt no fear. I felt something much more dangerous. Determination, because now it wasn't just about my money. It was about my name, my dignity, and about proving that even at my 62 years, no one could use me like an empty sack without facing consequences. And so in silence, a plan began to brew, of which they still knew nothing. I entered the lawyer's office with a folder under my arm and a knot in my throat. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, as if no one else were about to discover that they had been feeding a lie for 2 years. I told him everything from the beginning. The humiliation at the opening, the constant demands, the bank statements, the name Stephen Reynolds, the veiled threats. The lawyer listened without interrupting me, with his elbows resting on the desk, and his hands clasped like someone putting together a puzzle with broken pieces. "I need to see the contracts," he said finally. "The rent ones, the partnership ones, any paper that exists about that bar." "They never showed me anything," I replied bitterly. "I trusted." The lawyer nodded gravely. "Then let's start where the truth always hides, at the business registry." That same afternoon, he requested certified copies of the Articles of Incorporation and the bar's partnership contracts. I stayed waiting in the room with a coffee cooling between my hands. I thought of Michael as a child, of how he sought my approval with every small achievement. I thought of how his gaze had changed since he married Emily, becoming increasingly elusive, more dependent. I also thought of myself, of my voluntary blindness. 2 days later, the lawyer called me. "I have the documents. Come as soon as possible." When I arrived, he had them spread out on the table like a map of my own defeat. The lawyer pointed with a pen to several names, dates, signatures. "Here, Emily is listed as the majority partner," he said. "Here, Stephen is listed as an investor partner. And here is Michael as the operations manager." I looked for my name with anxiety scanning every line. It wasn't there. I felt a sudden dizziness. "And me?" I asked with a broken voice. "Where am I listed?" The lawyer looked at me with an expression I will never forget. "You are not listed anywhere." The phrase echoed in my head like a gunshot. "But I put everything," I whispered. "The place, the furniture, the machinery." "In legal terms," he replied, "you were an external contributor without contractual backing. In simple terms, you donated the money." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "I didn't donate anything," I said. "They robbed me," with a smile. We reviewed the contracts in detail. We discovered that from day one, everything was set up so that I would never have legal power. Every transfer of mine was listed as family support. Every big purchase was in the name of the partnership between Emily and Stephen. Everything was clean on paper and dirty in intention. "The scam isn't that you contributed money," the lawyer explained. "It is that they simulated need to keep extracting funds from you while the business generated profits. And above all, that they deliberately hid your exclusion." I closed my eyes for a moment. My chest burned. Then something happened that still makes me shudder today. The lawyer took out another document. "This was signed 6 months ago," he said. "A document where your son cedes total financial control to his wife by voluntary decision." I immediately recognized Michael's signature. "He signed that without telling me anything," I murmured. "He signed," repeated the lawyer. "And that makes him responsible even if he was manipulated." I felt a mixture of pain and rage burning inside me. My own son had sealed with ink the betrayal I was barely beginning to understand. The lawyer leaned toward me. "You have 2 options," he said. "Remain silent, lose everything, and remain at their mercy. Or gather evidence of fraud, financial abuse, and illicit association, and confront them with the law." I didn't answer immediately. I looked out the office window where people walked oblivious to my collapse. My life was splitting in 2 inside an office smelling of old paper. "I don't want to destroy my son," I said at last. "Your son already let himself be destroyed," replied the lawyer serenely. "You can only decide if you're going to fall with him." I left the office with the copies of the contracts under my arm. That night I walked back home slowly with heavy steps. I had the truth written on paper, but it was still hard for me to assume it in my heart. Upon arrival, I found several messages from Emily. "Did you transfer the suppliers or pressuring? This is going to fall apart because of you." I didn't answer any. I sat in the gloom of the living room with the contracts on the table. I ran my fingers over and over the names, the dates, the clauses that left me out of everything. I thought of the fake hugs, the calculated smiles, every "Dad, thanks," that today revealed itself as a mask. Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in his place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. The next morning, Michael showed up at my house without warning. I saw him through the window before opening. His shoulders were slumped, his face tired. When he entered, he didn't look at me immediately. "Dad," he said, "Emily says the bank rejected several transfers." "I rejected them?" I replied calmly. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "I blocked my account. There will be no more money without real explanations." "But that will sink us," he exclaimed. "What will sink you is not that I stop paying," I replied. "What will sink you is the lie you live in." He put his hands to his head. "Stephen is furious. He says he can sue us." "Let him try," I said. "I have lawyers too." Michael froze. "Lawyers." Then I put the contracts in front of him. "Look at them," I asked. "Tell me on which of these papers my name appears." He went through them with desperation. He turned pages. He looked for signatures. He went back. His face was decomposing line by line. I thought that," he stammered. "Emily told me you preferred not to appear." "Emily told me many things," I replied. "Most were lies." He let himself fall onto the armchair. "Dad, did this get out of control?" "No," I told him with a firmness that surprised myself. This was control from day one. I was just the fuel. Michael began to cry, a clumsy cry full of shame. I didn't want you to end up like this, but this is how I ended up, I replied. And now I need to know if you are with me, or still on the side of those who taught you to use me. He didn't look up. The silence was his answer. I knew then that the betrayal didn't come only from my daughter-in-law. It also came from the weakness of my own son. And that certainty was more bitter than any theft. After that conversation, Michael left without saying another word. His silence weighed more than any reproach. I remained alone in the living room, looking at the contracts still spread out on the table with the bitter certainty that there was no turning back. However, I also understood something essential. If I showed all my cards immediately, they would look for a way to destroy them. I needed time. I needed them to lower their guard. So I did the only thing they never imagined I would do. I pretended again. That same night, I sent a message to Emily. I'm reviewing everything calmly. Tomorrow we will see about the transfer. Her answer came instantly. Better be Stephen is losing patience. I read that message several times. I smiled with a calm that did not come from innocence, but from strategy. If Stephen got impatient, he would make mistakes, and mistakes leave tracks. The next day I went to the bar like a tired old man accepting defeat. I entered hunched over with slow steps. Emily saw me from the bar and frowned slightly. Stephen was sitting at a center table reviewing documents. It was the first time I saw him up close. He had a sharp look, the kind that doesn't observe people but opportunities. I approached with apparent shyness. "Excuse me, are you Stephen?" He looked up with suspicion. "Who wants to know? I'm Michael's father," I said, naming my son, the one who helped a little with the start of the business. Emily became tense immediately. "Robert, this is not the time to—" "Let him speak," interrupted Stephen, looking at me curiously. "What do you want, sir?" I squeezed my fingers so he wouldn't notice my trembling. "I just want everything to go well. Emily says there are money problems. I can no longer help like before. I am retired." His gaze hardened. "This business needs backing," he replied. "If you can't, we will look for another." "That would be a shame. After everything I invested," I said with a weak voice. Emily glared at me. Stephen observed me attentively. "How much did you say you had invested?" he asked. I gave a figure lower than the real one, an amount that sounded heavy but not definitive. "Oh," he said, shrugging slightly, "that is little compared to what moves here." That phrase gave him away more than any document. He smiled at me with contempt, barely concealed. "Anyway," he added, "we need a transfer today, or we will have to make drastic decisions." I understood perfectly what he meant. "I will do what I can," I replied, bowing my head. "Just give me a little time." Emily breathed a sigh of relief. Stephen returned to his papers like someone who has regained control. I left with my heart in my throat, and the confirmation of something I already suspected. Stephen didn't see me as family. He saw me as a source of money that was beginning to dry up. That afternoon, following the lawyer's advice, I made a minimal transfer, just enough to keep them calm, an amount that solved nothing but feigned obedience. That same day, Emily called me grateful for the first time in weeks. "I knew you weren't going to abandon us," she said with a sweet voice. Abandon, as if I were the one who had abandoned the truth first. Meanwhile, under the table, I began to gather evidence. I saved screenshots of messages. I recorded calls. I asked the accountant for reports on every new movement. Everything was recorded. Every order, every demand, every covert threat. A week later, Michael came to see me secretly. He entered nervously. "Dad Stephen wants you to sign a document," he told me. "What document?" "Just to justify the transfer, something formal." I looked at him intently. "Did you see me as a partner in any of the contracts you signed?" He lowered his gaze. "No." "Then I won't sign anything now either," I replied. He ran his hands over his face. "Dad, you don't understand. They can destroy us." "They already did," I told him. "Only you didn't want to see it yet." That night I received a direct message from Stephen. We need to talk, not on the phone. Tomorrow at 5. I didn't answer him immediately. I consulted with the lawyer. He told me to go, but to record everything. That the truth, when a scammer takes it out of his own mouth, is usually more forceful than 1,000 documents. The next day at 5 o'clock sharp, I sat in front of Stephen in a rented office near the bar. Emily and Michael were also there. The atmosphere was tense. Stephen was direct. "Your money is no longer enough," he said. "This business grew and needs solid backing." "I have no more backing than my pension," I replied, "and you have already emptied it quite a bit." Emily leaned toward me. "Robert, don't be dramatic." Stephen silenced her with a gesture. "The solution is simple," he continued. "Sell your house. Invest that capital. And we take care that you live calmly the rest of your life." I felt the blood rush to my face. "Sell my house," I repeated. "The house where I raised my children." "It's just real estate," he replied coldly. "Money is much more useful in motion." I looked at Michael. "Was this your idea too?" "No," he replied. "If you don't accept," said Stephen, "we will have to look for other ways to recover the investment." That was no longer a suggestion. It was a threat. "Recover what?" I asked. "The money was mine." Stephen smiled like someone talking to a slow child. "No, sir. The money you handed over no longer belongs to you. You transferred it voluntarily. Legally, it is ours." I felt my heart pounding like a hammer. "And what happens if I refuse?" I asked. Stephen leaned toward me. "Things happen that you don't want to see up close." Emily looked down. Michael remained motionless like a statue. That's when I understood that the game was not only economic, it was dangerous. I got up slowly. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "I'm an old man. I need time." Stephen nodded. 3 days. Then there will be no negotiations. I left that office with my legs shaking, but with something clear as never before. Now they didn't just want to rob me, now they wanted my house, my last refuge, my whole life. That night I couldn't sleep, but I didn't feel fear like before either. I felt a cold calm, the kind of calm one feels when there is nothing left to lose except what is worth fighting for. And I knew that the next move would no longer be theirs. It would be mine. The 3 days Stephen gave me to decide became the longest wait of my life. Every hour seemed to drag with a different weight, as if time itself knew something definitive was about to happen. I walked through my house, touching the walls, the furniture, the door frames, like someone memorizing every corner before an exile. That house was not just real estate, as he called it. It was my history. My children's laughter, my wife's silences, the family Sundays, the shared winters. Thinking about selling it turned my stomach. During those days, I feigned submission. I sent a couple of ambiguous messages to Emily, hinting that I was considering the proposal. She responded with poorly disguised enthusiasm. Michael, on the other hand, didn't call me again. His silence said more than any word. They already took me for defeated. On the 3rd day, I decided to go to the bar one more time, not to observe, but to say goodbye to something that deep down I already felt lost. I entered through the main door, and none of the employees greeted me. Some didn't even recognize me anymore as part of their history. I was just another customer, an old man sitting in the back with a tired face. I ordered a coffee. I looked around. The bar was full, as always. Laughter music, glasses clinking. The business prospered on the surface, while underneath they stripped me of everything. Then I saw my daughter-in-law, Emily, move with authority among the tables, greeting customers, collecting bills. She was the queen of that place, a place built with my savings. Michael was behind the bar. He looked at me only for an instant. Then he looked down. Stephen appeared shortly after. He saw me and smiled smugly. He walked straight towards me. "So?" he asked bluntly. "Did you make a decision?" "I'm still thinking about it," I replied with a quiet voice. His smile tightened slightly. "It is not something you can postpone much, Robert." "I know." Emily approached immediately. "Robert, don't be stubborn. Think about Michael, about his future." "I thought about him all my life," I replied. "Now I have to think about mine. She pursed her lips. Always so dramatic. Stephen raised his hand to silence her. Leave him, he said. Some men find it hard to accept when they are no longer necessary. That phrase went through me like a red-hot iron. I was no longer necessary. That's what they believed. And for the first time I understood clearly that I had never been seen as a father, but as a temporary resource. Something useful as long as it lasted. I got up slowly. I'll give you my answer, I said. Tonight. Stephen nodded like someone who already considers the game won. Don't delay, he added. Patience is not my virtue. I left the bar without looking back. I walked several blocks, aimlessly with my chest tightened by a mixture of rage and sadness. Upon arriving home, I turned on the dining room light and sat at the table, where for years I had waited for my children for dinner. I was silent for a long time. Then I picked up the phone. I called my lawyer. It's today, I told him. I can't pretend anymore. Then do it, he replied, but do it with everything. I hung up and dialed my accountant's number. Then I called the notary. Then an old acquaintance who worked in commercial auditing. Everyone knew that day would be decisive. Everyone did their part without asking extra questions. I no longer had the strength to explain what had been brewing inside me for months. At 9 o'clock at night, Emily called me. Well, she asked impatiently, will you sell the house? I took a deep breath. No, I replied. There was a heavy silence. Then face the consequences, she said coldly. I have been facing them for a long time, I replied. She hung up with a sharp blow. Not even half an hour passed when Michael appeared at my door. He knocked desperately. I let him in. His face was pale, his eyes red. Dad, what did you do? He asked me. Nothing yet, I replied. But you did do something a long time ago, letting them use me. He put his hands to his face. Stephen is furious. He says he will come tomorrow with lawyers, that he will sue you for damages. Let him come, I replied. I have lawyers too. Dad, this got out of hand, he said with a threat of a voice. It got out of hand the day you stopped seeing me as a father, I replied. Since then it was only a matter of time. Michael collapsed on the sofa. He cried as I hadn't seen him cry since he was a child. I didn't want this to end like this, but this is how it ended, I told him. Why did you never want to stop it? He remained silent. Then he looked up. Can I still save something? He asked. I looked at him with sadness. Maybe yourself, I replied. But the business and the lie, not anymore. He got up without saying more. Before leaving, he looked at me one last time. Forgive me, Dad. I didn't know what to answer him. That night, I slept little. At 8 the next morning, I dressed in the same clothes I used during 40 years of work. I didn't want suits or appearances. I wanted to face what was coming, being who I really was. When I left the house, there were already 2 vehicles stopped in front of the bar, one from commercial inspection and another from the police. I arrived walking slowly. The scene was chaos. Customers outside complaining, nervous employees' music off the door closed with a provisional seal. Stephen was shouting useless orders. Emily was arguing with an inspector. Michael was standing motionless with his face discomposed. I approached close enough for them to see me. What is this? Emily shouted when she saw me. Did you do this? I haven't done anything yet, I replied calmly. I just let others do their job. Stephen looked at me with fury. You're going to regret this, old man. I've been regretting for years, I replied. Today I start correcting it. The inspector approached me. Are you Robert? He asked. I nodded. We need you to accompany us for a few minutes. There is documentation to review. Emily went pale. Stephen clenched his fists. Michael looked at me as if I were a stranger. What documents? Stephen asked. The ones you thought no one was reviewing, replied the inspector. While we entered the inner office of the bar, I felt something definitive break forever. I was no longer a father helping in silence. I was no longer a manipulable old man. I was a man who, for the first time in a long time, had decided to defend his name. And outside, without them knowing it yet, The fall of everything they had built on lies was already brewing. The air inside the bar became unbreathable when the inspectors began to review papers, boxes, computers, and accounting records. I remained in a corner of the inner office, sitting on a hard chair, observing every movement with a calm that not even I understood completely. Stephen paced from one side to the other like a caged beast, muttering insults between his teeth. Emily argued with the agents with a contained fury she could no longer hide. Michael, on the other hand, looked like a shadow, motionless, pale, voiceless. The main inspector opened a thick folder and began reading aloud. Repeated transfers from Mr. Roberts' account to undeclared third-party accounts. Misuse of funds, possible money laundering maneuvers, partial tax evasion. Each word fell like a dry blow on the table. I glanced at Michael. He had his eyes fixed on the ground. "This is a setup," exploded Stephen. "That old man is resentful because we didn't let him get into the business." The inspector looked at him coldly. "Sir, your resentment does not explain why your name appears linked to 3 failed partnerships with the same accounting pattern." Stephen opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. Emily took a step forward. "Robert offered to help us voluntarily," she said. "It was never a scam. He knew what he was doing." I got up slowly. "I knew I was helping my son," I replied. "Not that I was financing a web of deceit." Her gaze went through me like a dagger. "You were always a hindrance," she spat. "Michael needed to fly, and you wanted to keep tying him down with your money." Michael raised his head suddenly. "Don't say that," he shouted. "My dad always helped us." She looked at him with contempt. "Because it was easy to use him." That comment dropped like a bomb. Michael stepped back as if he had just received the most brutal blow of his life. I felt something break definitely inside me. The inspector closed the folder. "By provisional court order," he announced, "this place is closed until the investigation is finished." A murmur of panic ran through the bar. The employees went out into the hallway. Outside, customers watched with curiosity and rumors. "This is an abuse," shouted Stephen. "I demand to speak to my lawyer." "You are within your rights," replied the inspector, "but the place remains closed." 2 agents placed the seal on the main door. When the last sticker remained fixed on the glass, I felt a strange peace run through my body. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling that for the first time in years, the truth had a place to stand. Emily turned to me with eyes injected with rage. "You did this!" "No," I replied with a firm voice. "I just stopped covering it up." Stephen approached me with heavy steps. "This isn't going to stay like this, old man," he whispered to me with a threat. "You're going to pay dearly for this betrayal." I looked him in the eyes without lowering my gaze. "What is paid dearly is betraying the blood that gave you a hand." He spat on the ground and turned around furiously. Emily followed him without looking at Michael even once. When we were finally alone, Michael collapsed in a chair. He covered his face with his hands. "I lost everything, Dad," he sobbed. I approached slowly. "You didn't lose it today," I told him. "You started losing it the day you stopped asking yourself what price we were paying." He looked up with red eyes. "I thought everything would solve itself." "That's how ruin always begins," I replied, "when one believes another will bear the consequences." We remained silent while the inspectors finished the procedure. Finally, they asked me to accompany them to declare formally. At the station, I handed over copies of statements, messages, audios, contracts. Everything I had gathered for weeks appeared for the first time ordered on a metal table. Every proof was an open wound that now had a name. "You were one of the main victims of the maneuver," said the officer. "Without your money, this structure would not have worked." I nodded in silence. "Do you wish to continue with the complaint to the end?" he asked. "As far as necessary," I replied, "even if that means facing my own son." The officer looked at me with respect. It is not common to see that courage. Courage. I called it tiredness of being used. Hours later, I returned home. I was exhausted. The phone didn't stop ringing. Neighbors, acquaintances, relatives who were finding out about the scandal. I didn't answer any. I sat in the darkness of the living room and closed my eyes for a long time. Past midnight, I heard knocks on the door. It was Michael. His face was undone. "Dad," he said upon entering, "Stephen fled. They can't find him. Emily is being interrogated." I felt no surprise, only a bitter confirmation. "Where were you when everything exploded?" I asked. "Hiding in the bar bathroom," he replied with shame, "like a coward." I didn't deny it. "Emily testified against me. She said she blames me for everything. She says I signed voluntarily." "And you signed?" I told him. He collapsed on his knees in front of me. I didn't know this would end like this. I just wanted to succeed. I looked at him for a long time. That kneeling man was no longer the child I protected, nor the young man who dreamed big. He was someone who had chosen the easy path until that path became an abyss. "Son," I said with a tired voice, "the triumph that rests on lies always charges its price," he cried, resting on the floor like a lost child. "What is going to happen now?" he asked between sobs. "Justice will do its job," I replied, "and you will have to do yours. Assume what you did." He remained silent. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. "Dad," he murmured. "Can I still start over?" I didn't know what to tell him immediately. "You will only know that when you learn to start from the truth." I closed the door behind him with an immense weight in my chest. That night I understood something essential. The planning of the fraud had been meticulous, but the fall always begins when the silence breaks. And I, for the first time in years, had broken it without trembling. And even so, the hardest part was still to come. Because now it wasn't just money at stake now. Blood was at stake. The next dawn arrived without me having slept a single minute. I sat in the armchair with the lights off, listening to the ticking of the clock, as if every second marked an internal trial. Outside, the city was still alive, oblivious to the ruin that had been unleashed inside my family. The phone rang again several times at dawn. I didn't answer until I recognized Michael's number. "Dad," he said with a broken voice, "can I see you?" I didn't ask what for. I knew why. "Come," I replied. He arrived less than 20 minutes later. He entered with unsure steps, shoulders slumped, his face consumed by the sleepless night. He wore the same clothes as the day before, wrinkled, dirty. He closed the door behind him and stood in the middle of the room, not knowing where to put his hands. "Stephen disappeared," he said. "The police are looking for him. Emily testified against me. She said I knew everything." I got up slowly. "And what did you say?" That I only signed what she told me. That I trusted her." His voice broke. "But they didn't believe me." The silence settled like a wall between us. Michael took a step towards me. "Dad, they are going to prosecute me." I nodded. "Signatures weigh more than excuses." His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to scam you. I never thought this would end like this. But you ended up doing it," I replied with a calm that hurt me. "Every month you accepted that money without asking, every time you lowered your head, every contract you signed without looking. All that is also a choice." He put a hand to his chest as if he lacked air. "I'm lost, Dad," he whispered. "Everything came down." He advanced another step. His knees began to tremble. I watched him in slow motion until finally he let himself fall to his knees in front of me. The dry sound of his body against the floor resonated in the room like a final blow. "I beg you," he said between sobs. "Help me, don't abandon me, now." I looked at my kneeling son. That gesture, which in another time would have split my soul in two, now filled me with a different sadness, deeper, more resigned. It wasn't the cry of a child seeking comfort. It was the cry of a man finally facing consequences. "I'm not abandoning you," I told him. "I'm letting you face what you did. But without your help, I will sink," he moaned. "They can take everything from me. They can put me in jail." "I also lost everything," I replied. "My money, my trust, the image I had of my son, and no one came to rescue me." He clung to my legs with desperation. "Dad, please talk to the lawyers. Withdraw the complaint. Say it was all a misunderstanding." I felt a burning knot in my throat. For an instant I saw the 5-year-old boy asking me not to turn off the light when sleeping. For a second I saw the teenager hugging me crying when he failed an exam. And next to those images, I also saw the man who denied me an opening, who allowed my accounts to be emptied, and who kept silent when they wanted to keep my house. "If I withdraw the complaint," I said slowly, "everything stays in the shadow again. Stephen will remain free. Emily will say it was your idea, and you will learn that there will always be a father willing to clean up your ruins." He raised his face towards me, pleading, "I promise to change. I swear I will change." "Changing is not promising," I replied. "Changing is assuming." He remained silent, trembling. "Do you still love me?" he asked with a childish voice. That question was a slow dagger. "I never stopped loving you," I said, "but loving doesn't mean saving you from the law." His hands loosened. He fell back, sitting on the floor, defeated. "Then I am alone." "No," I replied. "You are accompanied by the truth. For the first time in your life, you are with her without shortcuts." The doorbell rang at that moment. We both startled. I went to the door. 2 police officers were standing there. "Good morning, Mr. Robert," said one of them. "We come to formally notify your son that he must present himself as a defendant in the case." Michael stood up clumsily. His legs seemed not to hold him. "Dad," he murmured. "Go," I told him. "You do more damage fleeing than facing." The officers allowed him to change clothes. Before leaving, Michael stopped at the threshold. He turned around and looked at me like a scared child who no longer recognizes his house. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said. "That is discovered when one stops lying to oneself," I replied. He left escorted. The sound of the door closing left a void in my chest that no money could fill. Later I learned that he had been formally prosecuted for fraudulent administration and illicit association, that Emily also faced charges, that Stephen was still a fugitive. The news ran fast. The media spoke of the bar closed for fraud. Some neighbors looked at me with pity, others with a strange admiration. I just felt tiredness. That afternoon I received a call from the lawyer. "Your son asked to testify again," he told me. "He wants to provide information about Stephen." "To save himself?" I asked. "To try to alleviate his situation," he replied, "but also to discharge part of the guilt." I closed my eyes. "Let him say everything," I murmured. "There is no room for half-truths anymore." I hung up and went out to the small patio of my house. I sat under the old lemon tree that I myself had planted when my children were still small. The branches were loaded with yellow fruits, but I felt no sweetness when looking at them. I just thought about how easy it is to plant a tree, and how difficult it is to fix what grows crooked. That night, I understood that there was a wound that would not heal with sentences, or money seeing a son fall for his own decisions. I could no longer hold him with my hands without sinking with him. And yet in the midst of the pain, I knew I had done the right thing, because justice, although cruel, is the only way love has to stop being blind. And because if I kept saving him, he would never learn to swim alone in the waters he chose. The days that followed my son's formal detention were strange, as if the world had become slower and at the same time heavier. The house remained in a silence that was not peace, but absence. Every corner seemed to contain a question without an answer. His voice no longer sounded, his door didn't open suddenly. There were no arguments or demands. Only the echo remained of everything I didn't say when there was still time. My lawyer kept me informed of every advance. Stephen was still a fugitive. Emily had been prosecuted with preventive detention for fraud, coercion, and fraudulent administration. My son on probation faced serious charges. When I heard that word charges, I felt a dry blow to the chest. It wasn't a figure, it wasn't a contract. It was the life of my own son in the hands of a judge. A week after the chaos, they called me to testify again. this time not as a main victim, but as a key witness against the structure. I went with a slow but firm step. In the room, there were unknown faces, lawyers, officials, secretaries. When I saw Michael sitting in the dock, with his face dejected, I felt something inside me break again. But I didn't back down. I declared everything from the first deposit to the last threat. I showed proof. I repeated words I never thought I would pronounce aloud. When I finished, the judge observed me for a few seconds. "You could have kept quiet," he said. "You chose to speak." I didn't answer. I just nodded. Upon leaving, Michael was waiting for me in the hallway, escorted. When our eyes met, I saw in his something I had never seen before. Not fear, not rage, but late understanding. He looked at me like a man looks at another, not like a son at his father. "Now I understand," he murmured. I didn't know what to answer him. Sometimes understanding comes when there is nothing left to save. Over the months, the consequences began to fall like dominoes. The bar was seized and sold to cover part of the debts. Bank accounts were frozen. Suppliers claimed. Employees reported. The image of prosperity collapsed suddenly. And what remained was just an empty structure supported by lies. Stephen was captured in another city. He was trying to leave the country with false documentation. When they gave me the news, I didn't feel joy. I just felt the circle finally beginning to close. Emily was sentenced to effective prison. When I heard her sentence on television, I turned off the device. I didn't want to see her, not out of compassion, out of tiredness. I no longer had the strength to sustain that hatred. And my son received his sentence months later. It wasn't immediate prison, but a mark that would accompany him for years. Commercial disqualification, economic reparation, criminal record. When the judge read the resolution, Michael closed his eyes like someone finally accepting his own reflection. Leaving the hearing, he didn't come towards me. I didn't go towards him either. We said goodbye without words. There were things that could no longer be said. People talked. They always talk. Some said I had been cruel, that a father must protect his son above all. Others murmured that I was right. I no longer listened to anyone. I had learned that in the hardest trials, the only judge that matters is one's own conscience. I sold part of my furniture to cover legal expenses. I adjusted my life to a new reality. I was no longer a man with savings. I was a man with truths, and that weighed differently. One afternoon, while sorting old papers, I found a wooden box where I kept memories. Inside was the photo of my son as a child in front of his first lemonade stand on the sidewalk. I had helped him set up the table, make the signs, collect, always thinking that teaching him to undertake was teaching him to live. I sat with the photo in my hands for a long time. I thought about how many times I had confused helping with sustaining, how many times I had solved problems he should have learned to face by himself. I understood then, somewhat late. Ambition is not born alone. It also feeds on permissiveness. I had wanted to give him everything so he wouldn't suffer, and in doing so I took away the opportunity to learn limits. Months passed. My house felt only mine again. I started getting up early, walking around the neighborhood greeting neighbors. Some lowered their gaze. Others patted me on the back. I responded with a brief gesture. I didn't feel like explaining anything. One day I received a letter from the detention center. It was from my son. I took a long time to open it. I read it standing by the window. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that now I see everything I didn't want to see before. I lost the most valuable thing I had, your respect. I am paying for it. I don't ask you for money. I don't ask you for help. I just wanted to tell you that I regret having been the man I was with you." I folded the sheet with trembling hands. I didn't cry. I felt something different, a mixture of relief and sadness. Sometimes repentance arrives late, but it arrives. I didn't answer immediately. 2 weeks passed before I took paper and pencil. I wrote him only one sentence. "Learning hurts, but it is the only way to change. Since then, I haven't heard from him again. Today I live with less, but I sleep lighter. I no longer fear the phone. I no longer check accounts with anguish. My pension, small but dignified, is mine alone again. My house is still standing, my memories too, although some now weigh more. I have learned that the deepest betrayal does not always come from an enemy. Sometimes it is born in the same place where before there was trust. That love without limits can also destroy. And that saying enough, although it hurts, is sometimes the hardest way to love. I didn't win this battle. No one wins when blood turns against blood. But I didn't lose it entirely either. I saved something they almost took from me without me noticing. My dignity, my voice, my right not to be used until the end. Today, at my 62 years, I no longer chase other people's dreams. I walk slowly with the little I have left, but with the certainty that for the first time in a long time, everything I have truly belongs to me, and that after so much ruin feels like a silent form of justice. Almost a year has passed since everything came crashing down. Today I wake up early, make my coffee in silence, and sit by the window to watch the light enter slowly into a house that finally is mine alone again. Sometimes silence weighs, other times it gives me peace. I have learned to live with both. I never heard from Emily again. Of Stephen, I only heard his name once more on a newscast, and of my son only. That letter I still keep folded in a drawer. I don't read it often. There are pains that do not heal with repetition, but with time. And even so, not a day goes by that I don't think of him. Because one never stops being a father even when the heart is wounded. Today I live with less money, it is true, but I also live with less fear. I walk with my head high. I no longer make transfers in secret. I no longer answer calls with anguish. I no longer twist the truth to protect other people's lies. Now I protect myself. I have understood something I didn't want to accept before. Helping without limits can also be a form of destroying. Loving is not covering up mistakes. Loving sometimes is allowing the other to fall so they learn to get up alone. I don't know what will become of the future. At my age, I no longer make big plans. It is enough for me to know that everything I have, however small, is truly mine, and that despite everything, I am still standing. I am Robert, and this was my story. Subscribe to the channel so you can continue accompanying us with more stories that are born from the soul. Like this video, if this story touched your heart, leave me a comment telling me what you thought of the story. What would you have done in my place? And from what city are you watching us? I love reading the comments. Your support makes the difference. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for being here.